Well, thank you, Judith, for that. And now that forms the basis of our interactive segment tonight. Joining me in studio, I have with me Dr. James Kinyangi, the Executive Director for Climate Change, Agriculture, Food and Security, as well as Fatuma Hussein, the Director for Climate Change in the Ministry of Environment. They will be putting into light perspectives on issues that touch on climate change and how far we have come as a country in trying to address the adverse effects. Welcome to the program.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I want to start off with you, Fatuma. Where are we as a country in terms of addressing issues of climate change?
First of all, thank you for the opportunity to discuss and give information to Kenyans about climate change. As you have clearly said in the clip, it's a big challenge that the whole world is grappling with. And as a country, I think we are doing very well. We are one of the champions in the world. We have developed a national climate change response strategy in 2010. We developed a very comprehensive national climate change action plan with very clear priorities. We have a policy being drafted at the moment, which is at the final stage of validation. Kenyans of all sorts of walks of life have been represented and they have provided their views. We are also doing a legislation on climate change. We have various policies in each of the sectors that have a lot of importance for the climate change issue. In the energy sector, in the agriculture sector, in the water sector, there are many programs that are being implemented.
For most Kenyans, they will say that, you have outlined very many laws that we have, but are we seeing these laws being implemented on the ground? Is there enough resources being pumped towards ensuring that, these laws are actually implemented fully?
Thank you for that question. That is a challenge for the country at large. But I think specifically on climate change, we are for the first time developing one standalone and comprehensive climate change legislation for the first time. Previously, we've had legislations that are pieces of legislation that touch on climate change in each of the sectors. And to a large extent, they are being implemented, I would say. So,
to what extent aren't they being implemented? That is what we are more interested in.
Specifically on climate change, I wouldn't say they are not being implemented because you can see the renewable energy sector is doing very well. As a country, we are doing very well with the geothermal development. Climate smart agriculture is being championed in the country. And to a large extent is the kind of sensitization that Kenyans require to be told about what is happening where. And that is what this law that coordinates all climate change issues is setting to do.
Dr. Kinyangi, with all these laws, why are we still talking about food insecurity in Kenya? Because obviously we seem to have a lot of legislation, which if it was being implemented, we would not be still talking about need for us to donate food. Red Cross would not be asking us to give them money to give people food.
Thank you, Catherine. I think, let me start by saying that I think climate change and the added element of climate variability is the greatest challenge that we're dealing with. It's perhaps the greatest challenge of our age. The Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, which is the main scientific advisory body of the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, has recently put out information that goes beyond uncertainty, that says climate change is here with us. And so we have to take it seriously. And I concur with my colleague, the director of the climate change department here at the ministry, that there is a lot of legislation that Kenya has put into place, and policies and action plans and strategies to deal with this problem.
But are they translating to food on the table in terms of food production? That's
a very good question. Let me say that the question of food production goes beyond, I think, policies. It involves multiple players, multiple stakeholders, because it's a value chain. So it's all the way from the farm to the table to the consumer. And if you take, for example, past historical trends on how we have produced our food, with the added challenge of climate change, this is not going to be possible anymore. If you think about the technologies that we use, if you think about most of our farmers in the rural areas, they still use the hand hoe. If you think about the types of varieties of crops that they grow, they're still the local and traditional ones. If you think about the knowledge of agronomy that they use, it's still the old knowledge. If you think about the post-harvest methods of storage and making sure that pests do not destroy your food, it's still very old technology. So all of this is impacting on the food system. If you look at some of our manufacturing methods here, the types of technologies that we're using are still old technologies. And so we have to have an overhaul of the entire food system.
So it's not just about the climate, it's also the practice.
Absolutely.
All right, and we have a major conference coming up. We expect world leaders to converge in New York to try and look at issues of climate change. But even as they converge, I'm a bit curious, what happened to the Kyoto Protocol? To what extent have we seen it being implemented?
Thank you for that question. First, I want to say that at the global level, climate change is generally a global issue. So even if Kenya was to do all the legislations, all the actions required, then if it's not addressed at the global level, then it's not going to be easy for us as a country to deal with the challenge. So having said that, at the United Nations level, we have the Framework Convention, the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is basically a framework convention that guides the whole global community on how to deal with the challenge. Then thereafter, we developed the Kyoto Protocol that we signed up to. All the global communities, except a few, have signed up to the Kyoto Protocol. And what the protocol does is that it sets out legally binding targets for developed countries. And there is where the challenge is, because it only focuses on the developed world. And as the world progressed, we've seen development progressing at a very high level in major emerging economies. So because of that challenge that it left out these categories of countries, then the clamor was that this is not an effective instrument. It's not the entire emissions that we're handling. We need to have a global, all-encompassing protocol that covers all the countries of the world. That is what we are developing at the moment and negotiating at the UN level. So at the moment, the protocol is still in place. The first commitment period ended in 2002. We have negotiated a second commitment period that started in 2013. Kenya was one of the first countries to have ratified the second commitment period, because all countries are supposed to be ratifying. And at the moment, it's not in force, but countries are applying provisionally the requirement. It's setting to reduce emission by 18%, less than the 1990 levels for the developed countries.
Of course, most people are going to ask, how convinced are you that, we will see commitment in 2013 if in 2002 it more or less, sort of fizzled out or was ignored?
To a large extent, commitments, and that was the only legally binding instrument that we have at the global level. Therefore, we have no replacement. So we have to implement that. We can only push and implement that. But right now, we have a dilemma, because it's going to come to an end by 2020. So we are at a rush developing a new agreement that is going to be agreed upon in 2015. And that is why the summit is being called right now.
We'll talk a little bit about what to expect in the summit, but even as we move towards this particular summit, and of course we have MDGs, 2015 is just a year away. Food security situation, and given the kind of what I'd call lack of really political commitment across the globe in terms of addressing some of these policies that they ratify and things like that, what is going to be different?
I think let me start by putting this in perspective, Catherine, that you have to recognize that there are different parts of the world that address different issues. I would say Africa particularly, and that's where we are situated as Kenya, is a food insecure region. When you look at many other regions, when you look at Latin America, they have largely dealt with the problem of food insecurity. North America does not manifest food insecurity. Neither does Europe, and neither do greater parts of Southeast Asia and South Asia. So really the region where we're dealing with food insecurity is Africa.
But why is it that, and given our climate is much better than the Europes where they have winter, they cannot grow food?
Yeah.
What is wrong with Africa?
So Africa is the only continent that has the most diverse agricultural systems on the globe. You can think of the tree crop systems in the Congo Basin, where they produce yams and cassava and banana. You can think of the Lake region where they produce sorghum. You can think of the Ethiopian highlands where they produce teff and wheat and barley. You can think of the maize-based systems of Eastern and Southern Africa, all the way from Kenya, straddling to Tanzania and the other regions of Zambia and Zimbabwe.
I like the way you say it. You can think we have a lot of food.
It's a very diverse, it's a very diverse agricultural system, and that's where the difficulty is. The difficulty is in how you can get uniformity in terms of mechanization. The difficulty is in how you can develop crop varieties that can cover large areas or large tracts of land that are going to be uniform in their response. The difficulty is in how you create the right infrastructure to produce and distribute the food. Africa still has a problem of connectivity. Kenya here we deal with a problem of infrastructure, you know that. So it's a whole host of problems that converge to actually make Africa food insecure.
So are you convinced, you know, when the leaders, you know, gather in New York later on this month, that we are going to see a change? Are you convinced that we will be more food secure? We will see issues of climate change move away from the boardroom and start being implemented on the ground?
I am very optimistic, Catherine. Let me say I'm one of the most optimistic people. Because, you know, within Africa, you know that under the Comprehensive Agriculture Assessment Program of CADAP, under NEPAD and the African Union, that we have made commitments to invest more in agriculture. The African heads of state have made commitments to invest more in agriculture.
But are they putting money towards?
Recently, at the Malabo Summit in June, they made further commitments to actually support frameworks that build resilience, including bringing in risk management and insurance mechanisms. Now, through the peer review mechanisms, we are examining and trying to see how many of these countries are actually stepping up to the table and making good on those pledges. I think there are few. Some of the results are encouraging, like I would like to say, for example, Rwanda. Rwanda has put substantial resources into agriculture. Kenya is still a long way, although I think they are making those provisions within their budgetary allocations. A number of other countries like Ethiopia with the Ethiopia Growth Transformation Authority are actually putting substantial resources into agriculture. So I would say there are examples, and I think everybody is pumped up going to New York. We are expecting, with the support of the rest of the world, that we are going to make substantial commitments to the next period that will result in increased food security in Africa.
Lastly, what about for you, Fatuma? What is Kenya hoping to achieve out of this particular, you know, conference, and what will it mean in terms of, for the Ministry of Environment, when you come back home, what will be different about how you have been operating?
Okay, first of all, the conference has two objectives. It's been called by the UN Secretary General himself. It has two objectives. One, to ensure that we catalyze climate action on the ground, and primarily because of the issue raised by Dr. James here, that the IPCC report has created a very gloomy picture of what we expect. A temperature increase of more than 4 degrees Celsius by 2050. I think that is a big concern. At the moment, we are less than 1 degree temperature increase, and that is what we are currently experiencing. And with that reports and the recent measures of the global carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, over 400 parts per million, and that means over the last 5 decades, less than 5 decades, this has been increasing at a very drastic level. So because of that concern, and that whatever the global community is currently doing is not enough, we have to do something about it. So it's trying to mobilize action on the ground. Secondly, what it sets to do is mobilize political goodwill for the 2015 agreement. As much as negotiators will negotiate in the rooms, this is primarily a political decision.
Exactly.
And we need the global leaders to agree to the challenge and say that this time round we cannot let it go. We need to address this challenge head on. So hopefully for Kenya, as a vulnerable country, we've done our part. We have all the policies required. We expect that the global community, the world, the countries of the developed world will set out legally binding commitments whatever pledges they say in that, at that level, at the heads of state level, would be very important in taking forward the discussion of the 2015 agreement. And more importantly, initiatives will be announced there. The Climate Smart Agriculture Initiative is going to be launched. Initiative on renewable energy is going to be launched. An initiative on energy efficiency is going to be launched, among others, including climate finance pledges. So hopefully what we seek to see, because we all have the policies and the programs ready in place as a country, we hope that we can tap into these opportunities as quickly as they are launched there.
I'll want to invite you back a year from now to find out the commitments that we make in New York, whether indeed we are seeing them translating into change on the ground. But thank you both very much for coming to the program and, of course, highlighting to us issues of climate change and what we need to do, particularly to address the issue of food insecurity as regards climate change.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, we have been talking to Fatuma Hussein, the Director for Climate Change in the Ministry of Environment, as well as Dr. James Kinyangi, the Executive Director for Climate Change matters to do with food security, and of course just trying to put into perspective issues that touch on climate change, and particularly at a time when we expect global leaders to be gathering in New York later on this month to try and relook at some of the pledges that they have made, and of course to put commitment towards action, and particularly how best we can be able to address climate change. Well, you are watching Channel 1 News Hour. It doesn't end here. John Curia is on the other side of the studio. More news coming your way. Stay tuned.